stele that describes a military campaign led by Pharaoh Merneptah against Canaan. It contains a crucial piece of information.
The princes are prostrate, saying mercy. Plundered is Canaan with every evil. Carried off is Ashkelon. Seized upon is Gezir. Yanoam is made as that which does not exist. Israel is destroyed, and its seed is no more. All lands together they are pacified. The only indication that the Merneptah stele provides as to the nature of this population named Israel is that the hieroglyphics contain the symbols for man and woman, and the three lines indicating a plural. In other words, it refers to a semi-nomadic group that has not settled down, that does not live in a city. It's a group that moves around without a particular territory, and that is all we know.
The stele dates from the very end of the 13th century, 1207 BC, a concrete starting point in our quest for the people of Israel. Historians tell us that at the time the stele was erected, Canaan was organized around city-states under the domination of Egypt. In the strata of the Megiddo site corresponding to this period, the remains of a flourishing city have been found. During the whole of the 13th and 14th centuries, Megiddo was apparently a prosperous Canaan city, but suddenly, in around 1130 BC, it was destroyed. A layer of carbonized debris that is clearly visible in many areas of the site attests to the violence of the event that caused this destruction.
Megiddo is only one piece of evidence in a much bigger picture of the destruction of Canaanite culture. Other places were also put to the torch: Hatzor, Lachish, Bethel, and Megiddo. However, not in the same time. Some of them came down in the 13th century. Others survived a little bit. Some of them were destroyed in the 12th century BC. It took about a century until all of them were put to the torch. Who did it then? And why?
If we broaden our perspective, we can see that the entire Levant region underwent an intensely troubled period at the time. Egypt was no longer the power of bygone days and had lost its far-off colonies one by one. The Hittites, who controlled Asia Minor and the north of Syria, disappeared, as did the Mycenaean civilization and its monuments. As for the Levant city-states, they were swept away. The Canaan landscape was radically transformed. How did this happen? Cuneiform tablets discovered in the port city of Ugarit in Syria, which was itself destroyed at the time, provide the first elements of an explanation. These texts attest to a climate of fear and confusion. When deciphered, they provide evidence of the causes of this upheaval. Amurapi, the last king of Ugarit, wrote to the king of Alashia, today's Cyprus, "Father, the enemy's ships have come, burning our cities and sowing destruction everywhere." Which formidable enemy was capable of overturning the ancient world in this way? Who were these invaders who came from the sea? The archaeologist Ayelet Gilboa is excavating a site on the north coast of Tel Aviv. She puts forward the explanation that is most widely accepted by the experts.
One of the main, probably, outcomes are what we call the movements of the sea peoples, which are still, after about 100 years of research, a very mysterious group of people. Most people think that they came from somewhere in the west, maybe Greece, maybe Anatolia, which is west to us, possibly Cyprus, and settled in our region on the coast of the Levant. Now, among these people, the most celebrated, the most famous ones are the Philistines. We all know the Philistines from the Bible. But there were many groups of sea people. We know them name by name from the Egyptian records, mainly from the Egyptian records, from some Canaanite records too. Among them, again, there were many, but were such people as Sikila, Shardana, Luka, Ekwesh, and many other names, which are very hard to define archaeologically.
What can we learn from the Canaan and Egyptian sources? In Medinet Habu in Upper Egypt, a monumental inscription dating from Ramses III describes attacks carried out by unknown invaders. The carvings show a military campaign and a naval battle, capsized boats, archers, men fallen into the sea. Egypt's adversaries are clearly depicted. They are wearing plumed helmets with chin straps and sometimes strange horned helmets, a visual account of the horrors of a battle. In less than 1 century, the 12th, the Sea Peoples occupied the entire coast.
It would be a mistake to understand every single destruction of a Canaanite city-state as a result of an attack by the Sea People. The entire Eastern Mediterranean was in a complete turmoil. The economy was disrupted. Maritime trade routes were cut. Ports on the Mediterranean coast were destroyed, were attacked and taken. In a situation like this of economy falling, famine, political dysfunction, then one city can attack another. A gang of people from the highlands can take a city. Pastoral nomads can come also and try to gain some advantage by attacking a single city, isolated city. Everything was in chaos.
While the city-states were collapsing one by one, another development was secretly unfolding in the highlands. At the time, the population density of the region was quite low. Its barren topography made communications difficult. It was an enclosed area, ideal for a genesis or birth. Up until the end of the 1960s, the highlands were practically terra incognita in archaeological terms. After the 1967 war, these territories were placed under Israeli administration. Exploratory missions were then carried out at the surface level by a number of archaeological teams. Researchers went over the territory, square meter by square meter, carrying out a meticulous collection at ground level of any traces of human passage or settlement. The slightest object of significance was collected and its location noted. A task that required observation, sorting, and classification, followed by analysis. Certain sites were then chosen for This type of research is based on statistical methodology. The location of remains and concentrations of fragments are transferred onto a map of the area. This enables a reconstruction of how a given territory was occupied, the size of sites, their number, and their evolution over time. In this way, the highlands were inspected with a fine-toothed comb. The results were amazing. Between the 12th and 10th centuries BC, almost 250 villages were to be found in the highlands of central Canaan. This occurred without the slightest trace of a military conquest. It was a social transformation that was gradual, but nevertheless radical.
So what we see here is the map, the entire map of all the surveys of many years in the highlands from south to north. This map itself is extremely important, but there is one more step to take, and that is to show, to investigate this map on the background vis-a-vis the map of the period before and the map of the period after, and then you see the process. And this is really what's amazing, because in the late Bronze, it's very, very sparse. There are very few settlements. Altogether, in the highlands, maybe 30 or so. And then during a very short period of time, you have a wave of settlement with about 250 sites all over the area. And this is really the rise of early Israel.
Why can we call them the first Israelites? What characterizes this population which appeared in the highlands? The layout of their villages, which is very different from villages in the lowlands, provides a first clue. These villages were oval in shape. Animal husbandry was the principal activity of the inhabitants. A completely enclosed area was used to corral herds and protect them during the night. But why were these villages oval? This configuration is similar to that of the Bedouins described by the first explorers who entered the Judean and Transjordan deserts. Were the inhabitants of the highlands former pastoral nomads? Did they exchange their tents for permanent shelters? And if so, why? Israel Finkelstein finally seems to have identified a lead in his investigation of the origins of the Israelites. But in order to go further, he has to take into account ethnographic and ethnoarchaeological data drawn from an observation of the Bedouins' current way of life.
حياك الله في وادي رم. درينك تي بدوين.
Thank you.
لو سهلا تفضل.
شكرا.
عفوا.
شكرا.
The nomad's livelihood depends on a system of exchange with sedentary populations, a system that is based on certain rules. The pastoralists provide animal protein and leather, while the settled population provides cereals and other agricultural products. Cereals formed the basis of the diet of traditional societies, including those of nomadic herders. Without these grains, the Bedouins would not be able to continue their nomadic way of life. If, for whatever reason, the exchange system collapses or becomes impossible, the Bedouins would be forced to produce their own grain. But in order to do so, they would first have to settle down. What caused the collapse of the exchange system and forced the pastoral nomads to settle down in the highlands?
Remember that in the last phase of the late Bronze Age, we are entering slowly a major crisis in the entire region. Canaan, the neighboring lands, the entire Eastern Mediterranean is in a severe crisis. Empires collapse. Cities are destroyed. The Egyptian administration is gone from Canaan. People are running away from the villages. In a situation like this, the villagers cannot produce enough grain for the exchange with the pastoral nomads, and the pastoral nomads have to settle down. This is exactly the moment when we see all of a sudden a wave of settlement in the highlands. In my opinion, these are the pastoral people of the late Bronze Age who now settle down because of this crisis.
Archaeology shows us that the material culture of the pastoral nomads who settled down in the highlands was not very different from that of neighboring peoples, except for one particularity that distinguishes them: their diet. In all the archaeological excavations of the highlands, no pork bones have ever been found. What can this mean? What reasons can we find to explain this oddity?
There are several reasons, possible reasons. One is that if these people came from pastoral background, of course the pastoral people do not have pigs, and this could have been one of the reasons. But I think that there is a stronger reason to the fact that there are no bones of pigs in the highlands, and that is that at the same time exactly you have the sites of the Philistines in the lowlands, and in general the sites in the lowlands, Canaanites, Philistines and others, they eat a lot of pork. So the distinction between the people of the lowlands and the people of the highlands could have been a situation of we and they. They eat pork, we don't.
But that's not all. The highlands, where a population that abstained from eating pork settled, were not a homogeneous territory. In the south, vegetation was scarce and rainfall uncertain. The arid soil prevented any real development of agriculture. The environment in the north was quite different. More abundant water sources and fertile valleys meant that a cereal-based agriculture was able to develop. Not only cereals, but also olive trees and grapevines. The many remains of presses that have been found in the area provide evidence of a developed agricultural system and one of the most lucrative of activities, the production of oil and wine. The villages situated on these trading routes became more and more wealthy and developed into cities. Two different ecosystems explain the emergence of these two distinct entities. One in the north, which would become the Kingdom of Israel, and the other in the south, which would become the Kingdom of Judah. Archaeology has searched in vain for a trace of the unified kingdom of David and Solomon as described in the Bible. Did such a kingdom ever exist? Neil Silberman and Israel Finkelstein have analyzed the data from remains found in Canaan and in bordering regions. Two inscriptions in particular have shed light on the subject. The Mesha stele, on display in the Louvre, was discovered by an Alsatian missionary in South Jordan in 1868. The inscription advises that it was erected by King Mesha of Moab in order to thank the god Chemosh for a victory against the kingdom of Israel. This stele contains the name of Omri, king of Israel. It dates from the 9th century BC. Another stele from the same period was discovered in 1993 in the north of Israel. It states that King Hazael of Damascus killed the king of Israel, Jehoram, and the king of Judah, Ahaziah, of the house of David. These inscriptions clearly distinguish between two kingdoms, Israel and Judah. There is no mention of a single kingdom. Nevertheless, the Bible attributes a common religion to these two kingdoms, that of Yahweh. What do we know about this religion? It is difficult to reconstitute the vision that a people had of their gods through archaeology. Difficult, but not impossible. Excavations carried out in different sites in both the north and the south have unearthed a range of objects of worship. Fertility goddesses, companions of gods, and animal incarnations of the divinities. They are to be found both in Canaanite sites from the Bronze Age and in sites from the Israelite era in the Iron Age.
We have very, very little information about the religion. One of them I published, I found once in a kibbutz in Galilee, not far from here, Kibbutz Shamir. I visited and I found on a shelf there a bronze figure of a bull. And I asked where this bull was found. It's very nice. It's about 18 centimeters long, beautiful bull. They said a member of the kibbutz, he was a soldier, he was in training in the northern Samaria hills. He found it on a hill. The bull is the symbol, of course, of Baal, the god, the main god of Canaan, and also of El, the chief god, you know, the chief god of the Canaanite pantheon. But also is related to the Israelite god, especially in the northern part of the country. The bull, you know, the golden calves, they are the major symbols of the temples of Dan and Bet El during the Israelite period. There is a lot of continuity between Canaanite and Israelite religion.
What do we know about Yahweh? Certain biblical verses refer to a god from the southern desert, worshipped with more or less the same fervor in the north and the south. How well did Yahweh, the god of the south, and El or Baal, gods from the north, coexist? quite well if we go by the evidence of remains found throughout the land. However, the Bible refers to a conflict. The well-known incident of the golden calf that occurred when Moses went up Mount Sinai to receive the tablets of the law from Yahweh. While Moses was going up to the mountaintop, the people waiting in the valley made a golden calf. As in other similar passages in the Old Testament, the idol was ultimately destroyed and Yahweh triumphed. What did this conflict between divinities and this victory of Yahweh represent? What historical reality did it reflect? Is there archaeological evidence for the existence of the worship of Yahweh in the Kingdom of Judah? In the Museum of Israel in Jerusalem, we can see two amulets dating from about 600 BC, discovered southwest of the old city of Jerusalem. These pieces are covered in an archaic Hebrew text which says, "May Yahweh bless and keep you. May Yahweh shine his face upon you." It is the oldest text ever discovered that is similar to a biblical verse.
It's clear that Yahweh was the national god. Yahweh was worshipped like a national god, just as the Ammonites worshipped Milcom. The Moabites worshipped Chemosh, and so on. But worshipping a national god does not exclude the worship of other divinities. On the contrary, the national god is important for the protection of the people in leading the king and his people to war. But when it comes to matters of fertility, for example, or storms, other gods can be called on. For fertility, it's primarily goddesses. You have to imagine that in Judah, there was a small pantheon surrounding Yahweh, which was also undoubtedly the case in Israel.
Let us now review the situation. In 722 BC, Assyrian armies annihilated the Kingdom of Israel, the Kingdom of the North, causing an influx of refugees into Judah.